Hi, this is Evelyn Lopez. Welcome to another episode of Sustainability in Your Ear, the Earth911.com podcast. This time for the week of November 12th, 2018. We are recording from the fantastic Moonyard Recording Studios in Tacoma, Washington. And today we're going to talk about bits and pieces. So I have on the line Mitch Ratcliffe, our Earth911 publisher, and Sarah Lozanova, one of our Earth911 writers. Mitch, where are you operating out of today?
Well, I'm calling in from home instead of being in the beautiful Moonyard Studios.
You are missing out. The Moonyard Studios are lovely today. And Sarah, where are you today?
I am in beautiful Mid-Coast, Maine.
Oh, very good. What's the weather like in Maine today?
It's sunny and pretty mild, actually.
Oh, that's good. We have rain, but that's sort of our normal.
Now, are you past prime fall colors?
We are. We had a pretty decent storm, and it took care of a lot of the leaves.
Mm-hmm.
We're past the prime, but we haven't lost all the leaves here. But it's also, some of the trees are doing the strangest thing. They're not turning color at the ends of the branches, which I've always understood is where the sap recedes from first. So I am confused by my trees.
Huh, so your trees have green leaves at the very tips and then like yellow and red leaves?
And I've seen that all over town.
That's very strange. I don't know what that means. We'll have to figure that out. Well, before we get into our bits and pieces today, let's talk about some recent Earth911 surveys. Our first survey was, can humanity achieve a sustainable economy? Mitch, what did we find out?
Well, we asked Earth911 readers to respond to this. So this is not representative of the entire population, but of our readers. There's, I think, a pretty positive outlook. 13% says, yes, we can make it for sure. 26% say they think it's going to be a close call, but that we can make it, and it might result in less prosperity in the short term. Then there's the largest group. 39% of folks said, I don't know whether it's possible to change fast enough to avoid major climate disruptions. Mm-hmm. So that's all of the positives. That adds up to 80% or 88%. Excuse me, no, it adds up to 78%. Then another 22% are believe we're headed for an environmental and economic calamity. So we have work to do, obviously. Everybody agrees on that. And we need to give people, I think, more ways to act so that they don't feel as though they're helpless in the face of these changes. And I hope that can help that 22% feel more positive in the future.
Well, I actually think those are pretty realistic numbers. I know, as I've mentioned before, I have a number of friends who just sort of are taking a really fatalistic, view of the world, like, we're all doomed. Not that they're going to stop recycling, but they just feel very negative. So I think this is good that so many people, think that with a lot of work, we can maybe have some better outcomes.
Well, it's going to take a lot of work and several $1 trillion in investment, but we make several $1 trillion of investment every year around the world. It's just a matter of directing it into sustainability.
True. So the second question maybe is related to those people who are looking for some possible solutions, and that is, have you considered or have you installed solar panels on your home?
We were surprised by the result here. 50% of the people who responded said they either have or are currently planning on adding solar to their home. 50%. 27% of the people said they already have it and that it's paying handsomely. 23% said that they haven't installed it, but they're planning on doing so. They haven't not yet made the decision. Only 2% said that their home doesn't get enough sun. So they did look into solar, but they found out that the direct sunlight wasn't sufficient to give them power. One of the most interesting answers, I think, was absolutely no one agreed with the idea that they were happy with their electric utilities' renewable investments. In other words, they are not going to trust their utility to go green. They think they need to do it themselves. Only 2% said that they aren't interested in solar. And unfortunately, 36% said that they'd like to have solar but can't afford it. Mm-hmm. I think, though, that with the 50% threshold that we're reaching of people who are actually actively getting ready to or have installed it, we're looking at an opportunity where the market will the price of these things will fall because the market is beginning to get saturated with the technology. So those 36% may have a much cheaper option in the next 5 years or so.
I think that would be great. I know that there were some people around Tacoma who were talking about floating an initiative. I'm not quite sure how it would be funded, but to provide some assistance with low-income people who wanted to go solar. Their thinking was, why should only the well-heeled be able to take advantage of this, this benefit? So there may be all kinds of ideas out there.
A lot of solar installers are addressing this issue too. Like a lot of them are offering financing now through banks. Mm-hmm. And if it's financed over, say, 12 years, a lot of times the loan payment is lower than, is greater than the reduction, or is less than the reduction in the electric bill. So basically you can pay the loan payment with the savings that you see.
Oh, that would be nice.
Right. I've just gone through some solar bids, and what I discovered is my house at this point doesn't really have enough sunlight, but the loan packages, all of them, out of pocket is virtually non-existent because the savings immediately start to pay the bills. The other thing is that most of the financing programs have it set up so that they prepay as part of the financing the first year, during which the ramp up of the production of solar power in the home is covered. So you actually are no out of pocket at the beginning.
Oh, very good. Well, I was interested too, in the 12% that say their son doesn't get their house doesn't get enough sun to make this viable right now, and this may be your situation as well. It looks like one of the interviews that you did, and that's just up on our website, with Elizabeth Sanderson, you may have touched on that issue also.
Yeah, Elizabeth is the chief marketing officer at Sunflare Solar, and they make solar panels and solar, stick-on solar conversion technology. So you just paste it onto the building. They currently do it for commercial buildings and car parks and things like that. They plan to have this for homes, and they want to put them on cars and other things as well over the next couple of years. I'd like to get this. The key difference between the traditional photovoltaic cells that we're all familiar with and what Sunflare makes is their technology doesn't depend on direct, straight-on light. It can take indirect light and process it. So even though it's a little less efficient overall compared to photovoltaics, it works all day long getting the indirect light as the sun rises, crosses the sky, and sets again. And that's a really interesting alternative, because throughout the course of the day, the lower efficiency system produces just as much electricity as the high efficiency system, which doesn't operate all day long.
That is interesting. Well, and especially if they can get the price point down to where it's affordable, that is just a huge, huge game changer.
Yeah, and the thin film technology is going to be less expensive to install, and it weighs 1/5 or less than the traditional photovoltaics. Again, so there are a lot more flexibility in where you can put it.
That's interesting. So again, that's an interview that's up on our website if you want to take a listen. I also had a chance to talk with Paige Fascioni, the founder of Flux Undies, over the last couple of weeks. Flux is an innovative product. It is underwear for women that you can wear when you're having your period, and it has an absorbent structure so that you do not need to use sanitary pads or tampons. This is something that I had never really thought much about, but the number, when you think of every woman when she's having her period, so that's, women in the prime of life, usually from age 12 to 50, maybe having monthly periods and using 3 to 4 tampons or pads per day, every, 5 days of the month. I mean, that's an enormous amount of waste, huge amount of waste. And a lot of the materials that make up tampons and pads are not in any way easy to they're not recyclable, and they don't really break down very quickly. There's usually plastic backings and highly absorbent different types of materials. So the Flux system with these underpants that you can wash out and reuse is just very possible to save enormous amounts of waste going into the landfills, and saving significant money for the women who are wearing these. And it's Paige was explaining how it's locally manufactured. They're manufactured in the UK. They use sustainable materials, and they have a real commitment to also taking part of their income and using it to help girls in developing countries. They also have something that there are a couple of other products, some made in the U.S. that are similar to this, but the Flux Undies, they have an option for underpants that are detachable at the sides so that you can take them off and change them even if you're someplace where it's not really easy to move around. So if you're in let's say a bathroom in an airplane, if you are in a wheelchair and you can't move very well. Also, for some women in countries where you are still using, going to the bathroom outside, that would be a huge advantage to be able to change underpants or get them off and on without having to get your legs out of them. So it was a very interesting interview.
Yeah, I thought her points about the developing world and the fact that as girls in those countries mature into an environment in which you use replaceables rather than the disposables, you could really make a huge difference in the future of waste from feminine protection products as well.
Yeah, so it's big. It's a big issue. And one of the things we didn't really talk about, but I know areas where women have to, do not have toilets, have to go to the bathroom out in, secluded areas, but outside. That is actually a prime area for assaults and rapes. So anything you can do to sort of, help these women better handle these situations, it's just a huge advantage.
Yeah, it can make a big difference. I hope everybody checks out Flux Undies. I also talked to Greg Lettieri, who's the co-founder of New York-based RTS. It's a waste management and recycling company that is bringing Uber's playbook to recycling. So instead of buying trucks and hiring people, they are connecting people who have trucks and do hauling and recycling to customers using a big logistics network sitting up in the cloud. And this is, I think, a potentially breakthrough model for connecting people to better services, because what they've built is a system that not only makes the introduction between the hauler and the customer, it also tracks when the trash is picked up, how the trash is disposed of, and then provides an accountability report about the responsible disposal of the materials. So it's a way for companies and for public places such as Citi Field and National Stadium in Washington, D.C., where RTS is providing their recycling services on site to really give a report to their customers and to the community about how they are behaving with regard to their recycling. We would encourage anybody to give them a call. Right now, they're in about 11 states, and they're working their way out. Their customer focus is on business, not on the home. But this is a really great story, and one where they've taken, for instance, at Citi Field, the recycling level from the 40% range up to the 70 to 80% range. Now, I happen to go to baseball games at Safeco Field, which is one of the greenest fields in the country, and it's a pleasure to see them talk about recycling all through the game. That's taking hold because of RTS's work at Citi Field and also in D.C. at National Stadium. So it's a great story, and it's a good interview.
So, Mitch, will they also sort of give you some tips? Let's say you run a business and you have all sorts of different types of waste, and you're not really sure how to recycle it. Could they help you with that too?
Yeah, actually, that's a great point. They when you sign up, you get an onboarding, a training session, and that training session can be extended and specialized to your particular business. So they will send somebody out, and they'll walk your company through how to do it, and they'll provide materials to help you continue to do it after the training's done.
Wow, that's wonderful. Great. Well, today when we talk about our stories, we thought we would focus on bits and pieces. Now, a little bit, that's just sort of a hold-all place for us to talk about a number of different things, but also it's looked at, it occurred to me when I was looking at some of our stories that we have several stories of sort of how to take care of the smaller things in your life that you may not be thinking about, like the cleaning products, what they come in, your toothbrushes and toothpaste tubes. And we had a really interesting article on space debris also. So it all seems to fit in the bits and pieces category. And I thought we'd start with Sarah talking to us a little bit about how to dispose of cleaning products, containers, and toothbrushes and toothpaste.
As far as recycling toothbrushes and toothpaste, it actually is a fairly complicated process. Terracycle, though, does accept toothbrushes and other oral care products, but they're often made up of numerous different products, which makes them difficult to recycle. And they also like it when you empty out toothpaste tubes before mailing them in to get rid of any of the residual product from the container. So although
what does that mean, empty out?
Basically, just trying to get any residual product out of the container, so that once
you squeeze it out, you don't have to cut it open.
That's a good question. I think to really get it out, though, you probably would need to cut it open.
I think so, too. Okay. I think that you have to do quite a bit of work to get those tubes clean.
Yeah, I would think so. And then one thing that whenever I encounter a difficult to recycle product, I often think about what the alternatives are. And one thing I've started doing is making homemade toothpaste.
Oh, tell me about that, because I thought when I looked at the story on, the recycling mystery of toothpaste and toothbrush, I thought I need to do something different than toothpaste because this is a lot of work. So what?
Exactly. Yeah, there's got to be a better way. And also a lot of commercial toothpaste contain things like artificial colors, flavorings, even things like propylene glycol or foaming agents that are difficult to pronounce. So when you make your own, you also know what's in it and that it's something that you would actually want to put in your mouth. But usually when I've made toothpaste, I've actually made it with a coconut oil base. Mm-hmm. And then I put in things like baking soda, bentonite clay. I've sweetened it with xylitol, which is a natural sweetener, or also I've used stevia. And then you can put in essential oils, like I use cinnamon oil, so it gives it kind of a nice taste. And I was amazed. I have 2 kids, ages 7 and 10, and they love the toothpaste and were happy to use it. So it was a pretty big success. That's
pretty important, too, because I know that the poison control people tell you to monitor your child's use of toothpaste because if they swallow too much of it, which kids are prone to do, especially if it's sweet tasting, that can actually be really bad for them. So if they swallow the toothpaste you're making, really no adverse effects at all, are there?
Yeah, I would agree. The only thing that I find challenging when I make my own toothpaste is dispensing it in a sanitary way. Like I put it in a jar and then we use a spoon. But then if you're sharing it, in a household, it doesn't necessarily seem like the most sanitary way. I guess everyone could have their own jar. Mm-hmm. But that's the one downfall. I haven't found a really
could you use a frosting squeezer?
Oh, that would be an interesting idea.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask is how thick is the toothpaste? Is it, what's the consistency?
It comes out fairly thick. And I think you can taper it a little bit by how much of the coconut oil you put in, but it's a little bit thicker, just a tad thicker than commercial toothpaste, I would say.
Another thing you might think of I have cats, and our vet will give us little pet medicine applicators. They look like syringes, but they don't have a needle. They have an opening at the end. So I'll bet you could put toothpaste in there and then squeeze it out that way.
Yeah, and it seems like that would be washable and reusable as well.
Yeah. Interesting. Well, what other cleaning products do you use? Because I know that one of the things in disposing of all of these things is, some of them are pretty nasty ingredients. And so when you're washing out the bottles and putting them into the recycling stream, I do kind of worry about that.
Yeah, I've thought about that as well. And that's one of the things that's so great about making your own products. Again, you know what's in it. One of the things that I do for creating a really powerful natural disinfectant is to have one bottle, and you can even reuse a bottle, that contains 3% hydrogen peroxide. and then a separate bottle that contains white vinegar.
Mm-hmm.
And when you spray both of these simultaneously onto a surface, it's supposed to be a really powerful disinfectant. So I use that a lot, like if the flu is going around or, to disinfect the bathroom. But you just want to spray them on the surface directly, not mixing the two together in a bottle. I've also created powdered laundry detergent, and this is great because a lot of the ingredients come in cardboard boxes, so they're highly recyclable.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'll make powdered laundry detergent by grating a bar of soap and then adding in borax and washing soda and several drops of essential oil. That's a fun one. I've also created stain remover and dishwasher detergent. With the dishwasher detergent, I just use washing soda and then a little bit of citric acid and some essential oils.
Where do you get washing soda from? I haven't even heard of that before.
I'm able to find it at a lot of times at local drugstores or grocery stores as well.
Mm-hmm.
What's the difference between washing soda and baking soda?
I think the makeup is pretty different. I'm not exactly sure, but the consistency and the texture is quite different. Washing soda actually makes a good laundry booster too.
Now you have a non-toxic DIY cleaning recipes article on the site. Let's also talk about the idea of pre-cycling if you aren't going to make your own. What would you be looking for, and how would you check on the safety of cleaning products that you were considering buying?
A lot of times you can tell. One of the easiest ways is just to read the label, because they'll have warnings about, not swallowing things, keeping it out of your eyes, disposal, things like that. So whenever a product has strong warnings, it's a stronger, less, potentially more toxic product. Another thing that I look for is how easy it is to recycle the materials. Like, for example, I often will get powdered dishwashing detergent or powdered laundry detergent because they come in cardboard boxes and it's a more easily recyclable material. Like if something contains different types of plastic, that can make it less recyclable as well.
Right. So one of the things that you can also do for folks listening, if you want to make some decisions about the ingredients and then go look at the products for them, is check out the American Cleaning Institute's site. They do provide information about ingredients so that you can make better choices. Sarah, what about getting rid of the stuff that you don't use? I mean, obviously you will empty your box of detergent, but if you've got leftover residue in the bottom of a bottle or in the bottom of a box, is that safe to dump down the toilet? A lot of people do that. Is that a good idea?
Yeah, the way to find out, again, would be reading the label, and it'll often say if it's safe to dispose of. For example, if it says that it's not safe for a septic system, that's an indication. Or if it says that you should dispose of it certain ways, that's another thing to keep in mind.
Mm-hmm. There are a surprising number of things that are in your house, at least in my house, that you don't think about, how toxic they are until it comes time to get rid of the almost empty bottle. I'm thinking of like drain unclogging chemicals and things like that.
Yeah, paint thinner could be another one.
Mm-hmm. So good advice on looking at the labels.
And sometimes there's alternatives, like one of the best options is just to try to avoid buying those products. So, for example, if your drain's clogged, there might be a more natural way to unclog it, or you can do it mechanically.
Yeah, my husband he pours hot boiling water down and then he has some combination of vinegar and baking soda that he uses that seems to work pretty well, because most of the clogs are just an accumulation of sort of, soap and shaving soap and gunky stuff.
Yeah, and sometimes just mechanically removing things. I've taken something like a chopstick and just pulled out of a drain before. Mm-hmm. Although it's not the most pleasant process.
No, it's disgusting, actually. It makes you sort of wonder, what you're putting down the drain in the first place. But it does the trick. Okay.
Or wiping on the counter.
Oh, yeah. Oh, great. Well, that is very helpful. And I love the idea of recipes for, coming up with something that are alternatives to these, everyday cleaning and personal care items. So I'm hoping we can do more of that.
And you can even make a little bit of an event out of it. Like I've gotten together with friends before and we bring different essential oils or different ingredients to share, and we each make different products and then smell them to see how we like them or even try them out. You can even kind of have fun with it and experiment a little bit too.
I think that's a great idea.
I love that idea. And that gets people together talking about how to be sustainable in the first place.
Yeah, makes it fun. Well, let's go from our households and our bathrooms and kitchens a little bit further afield. Mitch, you want to tell us about how to recycle space debris?
Well, we have a story by Taylor Ratcliffe, he's my son, by the way, about recycling space junk.
I thought this was a great story, by the way. Make sure to tell Taylor.
It really was. It was his first published story, by the way. So after 60 years of space exploration, we have made a complete mess of our front porch. There are more than 500,000 pieces of man-made debris, some of it, all of it larger than a marble, but a lot of it only the size of a marble, that litter the space in the geosynchronous and low Earth orbiting satellite bands around our planet. So there's two distinct bands of satellites, some that sit in place and some that move. The geosynchronous are the ones that sit in place. Low Earth orbiting will move around the Earth. Or rather, they sit in place in the sense that they move with the Earth, and the others are going around it. As these things wear out, or they crash into one another, they become smaller and smaller pieces of very dangerous material because they're traveling at hundreds of thousands of miles an hour. In fact, recently, a piece of space debris, probably the size of a small stone, something like from the bottom of a fish tank, punctured a hole in the Soyuz capsule's docking module on the International Space Station.
Wow.
And if you think about the idea of someday we may want to be coming and going from the planet, we're going to have to clean up our mess there before we can safely go through that band of space junk. So we've launched about 4,900 satellites, according to the United Nations. And we've also launched a Tesla Roadster, which is now headed out past Mars, the ultimate expression of space junk with an ego.
Yeah.
Thank you, Elon Musk. We have to figure out a way to clean all this stuff up. And the story talks about a number of experiments that have been going on. In some cases, and this is what we started back in the 80s and 70s, we tried blowing up our space trash.
But that just makes more trash.
States and Russia tested this. Yes, exactly. It makes more stuff. And those two countries quickly learned that that's not a good idea. However, China does still try blowing up space junk. China has launched missiles at their own broken satellites along the way. And what we're seeing now is a move to a non-destructive approach, which creates more junk, and a lot of interesting experiments. So the story describes, for instance, what I can only say is like space flypaper. It's a gel-covered material that flies along, or that sits in orbit, and stuff sticks to it as it passes it. So it's essentially going to capture this. The question is, what do you do with it when your fly paper is full?
When you're full of junk.
Right. And how do you get it back? Or do you then take that and eject it out into space? And at that point, will our neighbors be upset later? Another interesting one, and there's actually a picture in the story, a video in the story of this experiment, was carried out by Remove Space Debris. It's a team that tested a net. So there's video of a piece of space junk floating off in the distance. A net deploys, spreads out, grabs the piece of material, and is then pulled back in by the satellite. Now, they're going to be able to do this a limited number of times with each satellite, but once they are done with that, they can direct the satellite into the atmosphere where it will burn up. And that's a way of cleaning up, or, maybe we should call it vacuuming space.
Yeah. Vacuuming and then incinerating.
Yeah, and the other interesting element of this, first off, we have to catalog all this stuff, and that's a process that's been ongoing. But then there's the issue of international law and ownership. Mm-hmm. A lot of these satellites were put up by other countries or by companies. There are actually questions about whether or not it's legal to go up and remove somebody else's satellite, even if it's broken. Oh. So we're going to have to figure out ways to work together to determine what we can go get and when we can go get it. So keep in mind, for instance, spy satellites. Mm-hmm. China does not want their spy satellites taken down by the United States or vice versa.
I was thinking when you said they were still blowing them up, that might be one of the reasons is they're more concerned about someone else getting access to them than the fact that they're debris.
Yeah, exactly. And of course, now if we ever do have this touted Space Force, that might be part of their job, not cleaning up, but blowing up.
Yeah.
And it's going to be interesting because you also have a lot of intellectual property floating around up in space that companies want to protect. So maybe they will be designing their satellites in the future. This is probably a good idea to self-destruct, but do it in a way that eliminates the debris.
Yeah.
Whether that's directing it into the atmosphere or not is a science question I have no idea about. But we have seen in the past couple of years, for instance, a Chinese satellite came down over Australia recently, and some of it reached the ground. Mm-hmm. It didn't hit anybody, but we have to be mindful of the fact, even when we do take the burn it up route, that there are other dangers associated with that.
Yeah.
So I think it's a great story and something you'll enjoy, including the video.
I agree. I thought it was a really well-researched story, lots of information. I can remember when I was going to law school, which was some 30 years ago, one of the things I was very interested in was the international law of space. And at that time, there were some, I don't know where things came down because I didn't end up getting involved in any of those issues. But at the time, there was some thought that we could look to the international law of the sea as sort of a place where we could borrow law from. Just as you have things that are lost at sea or that drift from one country's waters into international waters, you might be able to apply those same theories in space. But I don't know if they have. I mean, that would be more of a UN type of a exercise to know what they've done. But yeah, it's fascinating to think now that we're almost to the point where we're going to need to be scavenging, cleaning up, gathering things. I mean, we're really moving into almost a sci-fi movie.
Well, we are a species that loves to make a mess.
Yes.
That's what we need to change.
Yes. Well, speaking of making messes and then cleaning them up, I have a story this week that I like very much on the 5 weirdest things you can recycle through Terracycle. And I thought this was very interesting. Again, some of our little bits and pieces that we end up with. Terracycle is a company, we've talked about them before several times, that recycles the unrecyclable. They have mail-in systems, so go to their website and check out things you can mail back to them and recycle. But some of the things we have mentioned in the story are things like your writing instruments. You probably all have, I know I have, a mug or two of dead pens and broken down, especially highlighters that dry out. Mm-hmm. You can package those up and send them to Terracycle. They'll recycle them. Wine corks you can recycle. I don't tend to do this because the business downtown, Tinkertopia, that I love very much, uses corks in their art products, in their art projects, and so they're always welcoming our wine corks down there.
Yeah, it's good to have a local option for sure.
It is good.
Terracycles for games are a great alternative.
Yeah. As Sarah mentioned, Terracycle will take your personal care accessories, brushes, scrunchies, pedicure kits, all kinds of things. So you want to check that out. They will take your baby food pouches. I know we've discussed this before, that those baby food pouches are really great for busy parents, but very difficult to recycle. But
that one I thought is the best one and most relevant to myself as I look at becoming a grandparent and how are we going to feed those kids?
Yeah,
I don't want to create a mess.
Right. Well, and apparently it's quite the thing. And I don't have kids, but I think in your diaper bag you've always got to have extra stuff for them when they get hungry. So I think that's one of the reasons that these heatable pouches have become so popular. But this is the one that fascinated me. They will take your cigarette butts and e-cigarettes. Seriously. They will recycle all of your cigarette waste, including all parts of the extinguished cigarettes, cigar stubs, outer plastic packaging, inner foil packaging, rolling paper, ash. So I'm assuming they'll take your marijuana papers too, if you have some waste in that arena, since we are a state that has legal marijuana.
That's an interesting question. Do you mail marijuana trash across the state border?
I don't know. I would have to go to their website and check that out. Well, my guess most marijuana users don't have a whole lot left at the end of their, at the end of their joint. So maybe that's not really a high waste area.
But the cigarette butts. We also have another story about cigarette butts on the site called "Butts Out of the Ocean."
That's what I was thinking. Those cigarette butts are just horrible.
Did you see the numbers though? 4.5 trillion cigarettes become litter.
Yeah. Yeah. And they have, especially the filtered cigarettes. I know they used to have plastic filters. Now I think most of them are fiber, but it doesn't really degrade. Most of the rest of the cigarette will eventually degrade, but those filters are just horrible.
Well, and in fact, that becomes the largest source of beach pollution in the world.
It's amazing.
Not ocean. People sit there and I've seen them do it. They smoke and then they stub it out and cover it up with sand.
Yeah.
They're having to dredge our sand for this stuff.
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely. So if you're a smoker, Terracycle is someone you want to check out.
Indeed you do. So let's talk Earthling questions.
Okay, we've got a couple of questions this week. Let me just pull that one up.
We were all have Earthling message choral music or something like that.
Yeah, the special Earthling theme. Mm-hmm. So our first Earthling question comes from Austin on Facebook, and Austin asked, it looks like you had some follow-up with him, Mitch. He started out by asking, hey, I was wondering, do I have to rinse my plastic Starbucks cups for recycling? I've read many sources where it says no. My recycling center here doesn't care if it's a little dirty, as long as there's no liquid in it. So where did it go from there, Mitch?
Well, our initial answer is, you do need to make sure there are no organic materials in that plastic cup. Mm-hmm. It should be rinsed out, and the cup should be dry before recycling, because actually the liquid in the recycling process can, when it gets heated, cause explosions too, large and small. Mm. So the answer is, you can rinse it out, and if it's a little dirty, it's fine. But if there's whipped cream in it or something like that, that needs to be rinsed out. Mm-hmm. But Austin followed up and said, thanks, but is that the typical protocol? Because I've gotten mixed results. And really, that question hits the biggest problem in recycling right square on the head. That is, there's no national or industry-wide protocol for anything in particular.
Yeah.
There's no rules that say every curbside has to accept certain materials. There's no laws that say that contractors have to accept certain materials across all of the country. Every individual contract and community is its own playing field, and we need those systematic and consistent rules so that people can act responsibly, and we don't have them.
It's interesting because I would say even without any systematic or nationwide rules, my guess is that pretty much across the country, paper, regular paper, newspaper in particular, is pretty easily recyclable. And I would say similarly, probably glass is pretty easily recyclable, although you may or may not have a pickup at your curbside. But you can probably find a place where glass is pretty easily recyclable. But, once we get past those basics, the sort of old technologies, paper and glass, it's really an open question.
Yeah. And even, cartons, for instance, are one of my favorite ice cream cartons. Are not accepted in Portland, but they're accepted in Seattle. They're both green cities. What's the difference?
Right. I don't know.
There you go.
Yeah. I mean, I think it'll
That's part of the
issue, isn't it?
Challenge we have.
Yeah. I think it'll get better, as these activities become more the norm, and as the consumers, continue to demand, sort of more predictability. But yeah, right now it's a bit of a hit and miss. So our second question came from Kendra in Topeka, and Kendra asked, is hair dye recyclable?
This is a great question because I watch hair dye being used frequently, and there's always some left over. Hair dye is a hazardous waste, and that's because it contains a number of chemicals, the things that cause the heating that actually treats the hair. One is called PPD, which is p-phenylenediamine, which is a mangling of the word. The other is ammonia, and both of them can damage the environment. They also, when they're in combination, can damage it more because they create heat, and that can be very destructive to plants or otherwise. So if you flush it down the toilet and it ends up somewhere along the way, it could heat up in the plumbing as well. So you want to keep this stuff you want to take it to a hazardous waste facility if you have any left over. The thing to do really is to pre-cycle, and that is to prepare exactly the amount that you're going to need, not to be overly generous. A lot of folks end up with extras because they want to make sure they don't run out, but take the time to really estimate it and do it right. The other is you can make eco-friendly hair dyes. We also have a list of commercial hair dyes that are safe for the environment. It's on an article called Eco-Friendly Hair Dyes You Can Buy or Make Yourself. There's a lot of different options, but when treating this stuff as something that you're going to throw away or recycle, it does need to be handled responsibly and sent to a household hazardous waste facility. So if you have some left over, put it into a plastic bag, seal it, and put it into your hazardous waste rather than to your curbside.
Wow, that's good advice. Yeah, and I have to say, whenever I find out that something that I might use needs to be treated as a hazardous waste, it does make me consider that maybe I should be looking for alternatives. Definitely.
Well, there are a lot of alternatives, many of them available at specialty stores that do, you can't think of it, the hairstyling stores.
Oh, yeah, sort of beauty products type stores.
Right.
Okay,
right.
Gotcha.
Just to name a few, Morocco Method Natural Henna Hair Color. There's an ammonia-free L'Oreal brass. It's called Brass Banisher. And then make it yourself. As Sarah described earlier, there's a number of things that you can put together in a safe way at home. Again, make just the right amount.
Great. Well, I think that's it for this week. Did you have anything else that we needed to talk about, Mitch?
Folks, it's we have just come out of the midterm elections. There's a lot of difference of opinion in the country, but let's come together around the idea of keeping the environment friendly and help our grandkids. I think that's the message I'd love people to start to focus on and less on our differences.
Very good. Our common goals. Very good. Well, and just a little teaser, in the next podcast, we're going to be talking about food waste, hunger, sustainability as part of our focus on pre-Thanksgiving. I'm tentatively calling that Thanks Sharing, but if you have a better idea, I am open to it. You can send us...
After Recycloween.
I know, that one was really good. Thanksgiving is a harder word to work around. So thanks. I thought I liked thanks sharing, but this is the first time I've said it out loud, and thanks sharing is a little hard to say. So
yeah, and it doesn't have the ring recycloween.
I know, but what does?
Thanks cycling.
Yeah.
Thanks cycling?
Maybe.
Oh, thanks cycling might work.
Thanks cycling. I like that. That's good. Thank you, Doug.
Thank you, Doug. Excellent. All right, so next time we'll be focusing on thanks cycling. And if you have any thoughts or feedback or suggestions for us, you can always send us an email at feedback@earth911.com. And follow us on iTunes, SoundCloud, Spreaker, iHeartRadio, YouTube, and at our earth911.com website. We will see you next time.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.